First off, before I start, when I present in English, I tend to, because I'm Francophone, I tend to speak quickly. So considering the fact that I probably have the worst English accent here, if I do so, please stop me. If I use too many acronyms, please mention it, and I'll take a pause and start again. Before I start, though, I'd like to say this is my second Parari event, Symposium, and I'd like to echo Bob's statement initially. I think this event is critical. It is critical for Canada in the sense that the first event I attended in 2015 planted the seed of change that I will be briefing to you today. So just quickly, the first 2 points, the context, so who we are, what we're managing, the scope of what we do, is the first part of the presentation. Then I'll go into the regulatory model. And this, I will admit, is a model I stole from the UK in 2015. Thank you, Bob. Those 2 points will lead to my third point, A&E Compliance Assurance Program, which is a discussion or a presentation on the change that we're going through within Canada. Then I want to talk about our Ammunition Explosive Safety Program, the performance metrics we're trying to achieve or trying to identify, and then the communication strategic strategy and plan that we want to implement, because I think similar to a lot of other countries, the challenge, one of the biggest challenges we have in Canada is culture, is the reporting culture. And then finally, how all of this impacts our annual report to the Chief of the Defence Staff and our Deputy Minister. Similar to the UK, I don't report to the military chain of command, if you will. I do in the sense that I report directly to the Chief of the Defence Staff and to the Deputy Minister. Unlike the UK, though, we're not centralized. We're a very decentralized organization, and one of the challenges is trying to herd the cats and to point us in the same direction with respect to ammunition explosive safety. So a little bit of context. We spend approximately $175 to $180 million a year in the acquisition process of A&E or EO. 38 million rounds of small arms are fired usually in training every year. Ammunition explosives are under the direction and control of the Minister of National Defence, and I say that because we have a national act called the Explosives Act, and that act applies to everybody within Canada except the Department of National Defence, which puts us in a little bit of a pickle because it doesn't say what we must abide by. It just says we are exempt from the act. As a result, my organization was created back in 2006, but I'll get to that. And we provide, as part of our remit to the Deputy Minister and Chief of Defence Staff, an annual report on the state of ammunition and explosive safety within our department. That in itself is a challenge, and you'll see that. This is the organization I have. We are a total of 15, including myself. We're split into 3 sections, and that's how we accomplish what we do. We have a policy section, a team of 5. We have an ammunition explosive safety section, a team of 2. And then finally, our compliance assurance program, where we're putting the most emphasis these days and most of the change right now, another team of 5. This is the regulatory model, and if you were at Parari in 2015, you will have seen this presented by Bob. So this is what we used to use in Canada as a regulatory model. Basically, what we would regulate the life cycle of ammunition and explosives, but the challenge I found with this model, it doesn't talk about infrastructure, it doesn't talk about competencies or practitioners, and it doesn't talk about training and personnel. It just talks about the life cycle of a bullet from cradle to grave, and that was an inaccurate picture of what we regulate. So thanks to the UK, we went to this model. So this I found was more accurate as to what we do, because one, we're the center of the universe, which is great. But just to go through this quickly, the Deputy Minister and Chief of Defence Staff would give us our direction. We would look at national legislation if it applied, and if it didn't apply, we would look to see if it should apply in some shape or form. We'd look at the international regulatory best practices. We take all that together and we develop our policies, orders and directives, which we put down to the regulated community, which is that green line going down from DAER. Of course, stakeholder engagement, because we don't implement, I believe, we don't implement policies and regulations without engaging our stakeholders. We do compliance activities over the regulated community, and then we get the results back. And then from that, we provide a report up to the chain of command. So this builds up to the change that we're currently going through, and I'll try and explain it without being too Canadianized. A little bit of history. So back in 2005, we had a review done of our department with respect to how we managed ammunition and explosives. That was done by the Chief Review Services. In 2006, DAR was stood up because it had been recognized that we had an organization, a department that had church and state mixed together. We were having the life cycle managers, the engineers, and the regulator all part of one organization, and a little bit of church and state going on. So they created DAR as a separate entity, arm's length, the rest of the department. In 2010, we developed the Ammunition Explosive Safety Inspection. It's a checklist, basically, that allowed us to look at the Army, Air Force, Navy, our special ops, and community, really, and we looked at first, second, and third line storage facilities. In 2012, the organization went through what was called the Ammunition Program Review, and that led to a restructure of how we managed ammunition and explosives within the department, still within a decentralized framework. In 2013, that organization that program was formally recognized. As you see there, it has 9 elements or 9 pillars. So the question we had to ask ourselves, and this was following Parari 2015, is so what? What does the fact that we developed a tool before the standing up of an ammunition program, what does that mean for us as a regulator? Do we need to look at that tool? So what we did is a side-by-side comparison. And what we realized is that what we were currently doing as far as compliance assurance is we were looking at one element of the 9 elements that established the ammunition program. And we were basically looking at the safety within the first, second, and third line facilities only. And we weren't looking at practitioners, we weren't looking at infrastructure, we weren't looking at, more importantly, at element number 2, which is ammunition explosive equipment program management. So if we were to report on the state of ammunition explosive safety of the department to the minister and deputy minister and chief defense staff, well, right now I was only reporting on 1/9 of what we really were. That led to this proposal, which was endorsed. Since I reported to the deputy minister and chief defense staff, they rely on myself and my organization to make the right decisions. So this is what was proposed and what we started doing last year, actually. So we do regulatory oversight through our policies, orders, and directives. That doesn't change. We still have the ammunition explosive safety program. Those form the foundation of the ammo program itself. But what we were proposing was to implement the same comprehensive approach as we applied to element 4 to all the elements of the ammo program. So basically, the execution of an ammunition program based, so by element or by pillar, if you will, a risk-informed compliance assurance program. By risk-informed, I put conceptual illustration here just because it's still a work in progress. But how we're going to do that is we are looking at all the regulatory directives and policies that we own as an organization and how they apply to each element. So that third column that you see on the table are the policies that we own that apply to each of the elements that you see in the first column. And what we're doing is we have identified OPIs, or organizations, that are responsible for delivering those elements. So for element 2, for example, you would see the Associate Deputy Minister of Materiel, who's responsible for the acquisition, lifecycle management of munitions, as well as the engineering assessment. And we also have our special ops folks that also fall under element 2. What we're doing is we're taking all the policies and we're developing a checklist, just like we have for element 4, to ensure that we are ensuring ammunition explosive safety within the context of that element. We are a year into this change, and we are right now at a point where I think we've reached a beta version of that checklist, which we intend to implement in January of this year. And by April, I expect to report on not the results of that process, because we're still too early, but I want to report to the Deputy Minister and Chief of Defense Staff as to the progress made in establishing that checklist. And this will prove the concept. The next step will be probably looking at element 7, which you see there, which is infrastructure. In Canada, the infrastructure is zero problem. We have 1950s, 1940s era infrastructure, and a lot of our risk assessments are being written to accommodate for poor infrastructure. It's risk-based because, or it's risk-informed because element 4, which is looking at the storage facilities, is probably something we'll be doing every year on the year, because that is where our technicians deal with the munitions. But we may decide that for infrastructure, that'll be something we might look at every 5 years, because we know that for us, it takes 8 to 10 years to build something. It'll be sort of pointless to look at it every year. And same thing, so we will go through all the elements and decide what's the risk associated with those elements, and that risk will drive the cycle of inspection or compliance assurance. So this is conceptual illustration. My end of the year report could look like this. Basically, elements 1 to 9, the assessed risk, and a description. You'll note that element 1 is my own organization. Now, I don't plan on looking at it myself, but what we planned on doing was bringing a third party, or if you will, a fourth party, the Office of the Auditor General or the Chief Review Services, to look at us every 5 years and to tell us, did we hit the mark? Did we implement what you said we should have implemented 5 years ago? And is there a need for change? So going forward on that particular initiative, I'm engaging senior leadership. So we're moving forward on the 9 elements, and that was actually formally brought in last week when I presented to what we call the Ammunition Program Oversight Committee. So we will establish ammunition explosive safety inspections by element for each element as appropriate. Implementation through a cycled process. And then ourselves will be subject to a departmental evaluation or audit to validate the conduct and performance of our compliance program. Now, to change gears, I'm going to talk a little bit about our ammunition explosive safety program and some of the challenges that we're facing. The next few slides are demonstration. This uses last year's data and was reported to our Deputy Minister and Chief of Defense Staff. The next few slides basically are just extracts from that report. The content is not that relevant, but it's the so what at the end of the 3 slides that I'll drive home. So we see here over the course of 7 years, on an annual basis, we record about 240, 245 occurrences, which are incidents, near misses for us, or accidents. On average, 240. Every year for the past, 10 years we've been doing this report, we roughly hit the same distribution, plus or minus 5. So human error floats around 169. System weapons related, 18. That doesn't change very much. And this is the distribution within our organization. You see the Royal Canadian Navy has roughly about 5 accidents a year, roughly about 40-some incidents a year. The Navy reports 18 with about 19 accidents, and then the Air Force reports roughly about 20-some accidents with over 120 incidents. There's a lot to be drawn from this graph. You can either say that, well, either the Army isn't reporting, the Air Force is over-reporting. I think what we see here for Canada anyways, the Air Force reports a lot because of the culture that exists in the Air Force, because of the flight safety systems, the Director of Flight Safety, the airworthiness program. That's why you see such a high reporting in incidents and accidents, which I think is a good thing. The Navy, very similar but a smaller scale, and the Army is pretty much 1 for 1. Now, in the past, I used to look at the Army and say, well, I think the issue here is the Army's just not reporting. But I think there's a little bit more questions that we need to ask. Why are they not reporting? I know that in the Air Force, and I know that in the Navy, when something happens on a ship or on the flight line, you turn around, you got your hangar. And in your hangar, you got your computer system, and you input your data pretty much immediately. That's not the case for our Army. For the Canadian Army, something might happen while in the field. They don't necessarily have the equipment like the Air Force and Navy to report something immediately. They take note of it, and when they get back from the exercise on Friday, they might input it in or they might not. I think there's some challenges in how reports are generated within the Army, which are not the Army's problem per se. At the end of the day, we have about an average of 3 incidents per accident, which I think is I'm not sure if that's the right number. and I'm looking for that number. Right now, what I've indicated to my chain of command is I'm going to accept 15 incidents per accident, which is pretty much a national standard of what happens in Canada in industry. Is that reflective of what the Department of National Defense should be looking at? I'm not sure, but that's the only thing I can go by now. And if I look at that number, and if we assume that 15-to-1 ratio is an accurate depiction of incidents to accidents and is accurate for the Department of National Defense, then my objective would be to take that 3 incidents per accidents and bring that to the 15-to-1 ratio as opposed to 3-to-1. I'm not saying we need to have more incidents so that the numbers jive. What I'm saying is that we're most likely not reporting a lot of the incidents and near misses. So it's garbage in, garbage out. If I'm not getting an accurate picture of the state of ammunition explosive safety within the department, then I'm not reporting an accurate picture. And I'm not allowing the chain of command and senior leadership to make the right decisions based on the information. So going forward, I'm looking to establish a comm strategy, something that's been lacking in Canada for quite some time. A communication strategy to go out to all the Army, Air Force, Navy, and Special Forces and actually spread the word of ammunition explosive safety. I want to establish performance metrics to measure the desired outcome. So the incident accident is a good example. Sorry. I'm going to execute it. I'm going to review it. I'm going to re-execute. So the takeaway here, something I didn't put on the slide sheet, is that in 1st of April, we implement what we call ASIMS, the Ammunition Explosive Safety Information Management System. And it automates the reporting of occurrences and incidents, or accidents and incidents within the department. And it's a great tool because right now my team can now see the morning of an incident. They will see it on the screen in this database, and we can start making some decisions, and we can start doing some trend analysis. Well, that was the hope anyways. I was hoping that through this system we'd be able to do that. But what I've noted is that, again, garbage in, garbage out, and what I briefed my chain of command last week was that, and the community, was that all we've achieved so far is getting nothing quicker. We've noted that, unfortunately, the quality of the reporting is not where it needs to be, but that's a good thing. Having noted that, and now I have proof of that, and I can demonstrate that we're not where we need to be with respect to our reporting, not only the reporting of what we need to report, but the quality of what we're getting. So there's nothing I can draw from the current information, so that tells me I need to focus now on educating the community as to what we need to report on. That will be the first step. The next step will work on the metrics. All that affects the annual report. This was the direction I gave to my team last year for the annual report that we're doing. It needs to be concise. It needs to be relevant. We need to have measurable and consistent metrics. And in our case, we need to promulgate it in short order. The challenges we're having is that the fiscal year ends in April, and the report this year's report hasn't even gone out yet. It's too much of a lag, so it makes it irrelevant. So going forward, we've amended the report. I don't know if you've seen the report before, but it was a fair brick size, English and French. It had a lot of information in it, a lot of statistics, a lot of data. We've amended that report. We've taken all the raw data out. That's sitting on our website. We've taken it from a semi-rigid cover to a magazine look. I've separated French and I've separated English. We have to do that in Canada. We have to have an English and French version. Usually they're combined. I've separated the two. This is all tactical stuff, but at the end of the day, the whole objective here was to make this something that you'd want to bring with you on the bus, on a plane, at coffee. I want it to be something that is not imposing with respect to the size, and I want to have it have information that was relevant. It is an ammunition program-based report, so I've taken the 9 elements and I've structured that report to look like those 9 elements. So the infrastructure folk know where to go when they want to look at infrastructure observations, as opposed to reading the entire report. At the end of the day, the report's gone from 144 pages to 34, or 68 to 34 unilingual, and it's something that I think will be an easy read. I've called for strategic pause in our statistics, in our reporting. I created a position that will do analytics for us, hoping that ASIMS would provide us the information we need. But so I called a strategic pause for 2 years on statistics because I thought and I felt that we were reporting nothing. We were just taking numbers and saying, this year we have higher number of incidents compared to last year. This year we had more occurrences compared to last year, but I couldn't draw any so whats. So I said, we're gonna stop doing that for now. We're gonna sit back and reload. We're gonna look at ASIMS. We're gonna clean up the data that we're getting. And when we're comfortable with the information that we're actually getting, then we're gonna start drawing some so whats. I'd like to be in a position in the future to be able to look at a trend, identify a trend, analyze it, and for example, say to the Army, Commander of the Army, say, sir, we've noticed an increase in occurrences at this base and that base, which happen to be your training bases. We've noted that we've bought new equipment recently, weapon systems, and that these occurrences are happening on those weapon systems. You may want to look in that area, as opposed to just saying we have more occurrences than last year or less. So I've created a position to do that, and the intent is to derive so whats. I've also engaged departmental regulators, other departmental regulators, like the fire warden, the fire marshal within our organization, and our joint JSET, our EOD guys, explosive ordnance disposal guys. They also do inspections, compliance inspections, just like the fire warden. And I find that we look at the same thing sometimes through the same lens, sometimes through a different lens, and I'm trying to create synergies. And at the end of the day, I'd like to create a report that augments or complements somebody else's report. Right now, we run the risk, and we've seen it in Canada, where the fire warden will report on something on a particular depot, and then we will report on something different, but for the public, it looks like the same thing for the same depot, and that just leads to confusion. There's also synergies where perhaps the EOD guys, the JSET guys can look at the same thing or look at things for us. And in that way, I've imparted some culture into them. And then there's some things that we can look at for them. So other than noticing the guy on the top left there doesn't wear any ear defenders, are there any questions? And Bob, I'm a little disappointed. I didn't find as many slides as I'd liked to steal for next year. But I'm working on it. Thank you. Oh, yes.
Mick, how have you gone about defining what an EO incident is? And then have you got a process of triaging that? Because we have an EO incident reporting system, and if if someone trips over a box of EO on the floor, that may be an EO incident for someone. It may not be for others. And then clearly you've got genuine defective EO that causes issues. So how do you define that, and then how do you start to filter that when you start putting this stuff in the system?
It's a good question, because even just trying to identify a common definition amongst the nations as to what's an incident, what's an accident. But for us, if in simple terms, an incident is a near miss. Now, I've had a question from the Army going, well, if we have a misfeed, we're on the range, we're firing, and a gun jams, you do your immediate actions, click, click, round pops out, is that an incident? I would argue, no, it's not an incident. If that happens 15 times with the 5 guys firing there, that would lead to an incident. Because it may be the round, it may be the specs, whatever, it might be the munition or the item, the weapon system itself. That is difficult to, that common sense, if you will, is not necessarily common, and that's the challenge. Is we need to write our policies that are clear, but they're also allow for flexibility and interpretation. And that's where we get into the issues as to, well, I didn't think that was an incident, I thought that was an incident. I think that will always exist for us right now, but my first challenge would be to actually instill that thought process so that when you do get 15 on the range safety officer is going to report that. Right now, that doesn't happen at all. It's a very valid point, and I don't know the answer to that. Yes?
Good morning, thank you for your presentation. I have a question about your ASIMS platform. Who are your partners in developing that platform? What is it based on?
I'm not sure if everybody heard the question, so I'll make sure, Robin, I was paying attention. This is a test now, isn't it? So the first question is what was the platform, so the software platform? Yep, nodding, good. And the second part is about the trend analysis, how you go about doing the trend analysis.
So the ASIMS platform was developed internally, and Tony, correct me if I'm wrong, it was the result of an observation made in 2005, finally rolled out in 2016, 17. But it was an internal effort done by our IM folks, our training folks, and ourselves. So there was no third party involved. I look at it today and it's easy. 2020 hindsight is easy, but I think what we've gone ahead and done was basically take the paper-based process and we made it automated without necessarily looking at our requirements and saying what do we really need today and what do we need to report on. I think that was sort of missed in the effort of making it paperless, which now prompts us to actually have a review, and as releases come out in the future, perhaps start changing the course of what we need to report on. So that was a miss on our part, but I think it wasn't, it was la force des choses. I'm not sure how to translate that, but through the course of things that happened, that's the way it went. Your second question again, please?
How do you do trend analysis for really rare events, essentially? So you have a very small inventory and unpredictable nature. How do you trend analysis on that? Can that tool handle it?
If I were strictly to look at our own organization, I would say we don't do trend analysis on that because I wouldn't see how to do it within the context of what we do. If I really wanted to do trend analysis, like accidents and incidents, I would probably look at the other nations. If our definitions were the same, you would getting the same types of accidents and incidents, then there's probably some argument to have an international approach to doing trend analysis. If we didn't have a sample base that was big enough, that's how I would propose to do it. But right now, I'm not even in a position to do trend analysis. I haven't. In 2 years, when I'm back here, I hope I can give you an answer.
I might just jump in with a little bit more there because I'm seeing a waving hand up there. We do share our incident databases through MZAC, and so because of the very problem that we're talking about, relatively infrequent accidents, it's important to keep an eye on what else is going on with our friends, and we do that through MZAC. I'm sure we'll expand on that a little later, so perhaps in our panel this afternoon, because it is an area that we're looking at very closely as well, is how do we, one, collect the right information, and then what do we do with it to understand those so whats. So we do have a little bit more time if anyone else has more questions.
Thank you.